So, welcome everyone to an insightful legal tech, global legal tech talks in conjunction with Arctic Wolf. My name is Frances Anderson. I'm the CEO of Netlaw Media, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today, where we are going to be discussing mastering SaaS security operations, streamlining your digital defense. So today we're going to look at cyber resiliency and how it is crucial for protecting critical business infrastructure in a streamlined and synchronized manner. With high regulation and reputation at stake, law firms must implement a robust cyber ecosystem to ensure adequate digital defense in an era of AI. With the market favoring a cloud-based SaaS approach to critical business functions, we have four special guests with us today, where we'll be discussing the future of SecOps and how to prepare for the inevitable but limited impact of a breach. Leading today's session is Christian Toon. He's the former CISO of Pinson Masons, who will be chairing the session and who will bring you into the debate should you have any questions. The session is live, and if you'd like to speak with Christian or any of the additional panel members and ask them a question, please do so through the chat or the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the screen, or raise your hand during the debate, and we'll bring you into the discussion. Now, moving forward, our chair of today's session is a globally recognized cybersecurity leader with over 2 decades of experience in information protecting strategy across various industries. As a former chief information security officer at an international law firm, Christian has demonstrated expertise in safeguarding sensitive data and implementing robust security frameworks for multinational organizations. So welcome, Christian. And again, thank you everyone who has joined us. And now I'm delighted to hand the running of this over to you.
Thank you, Francis. I was just starting to think this host sounds amazing, then I realized it was me. So I hope I don't disappoint. Thank you for having me. I'm dutifully joined this morning by some esteemed colleagues and experts in the field as well. So it's an absolutely packed panel of expertise and insight. Welcoming along Nigel, CIO from Field Fisher, Stephanie Ness, specialist CISO and CTO with a legal counsel background specializing in cyber and data privacy. Graham Holt, the UK Regional Sales Director from Arctic Wolf. And I'm just going to allow the panelists to kind of give a bit more depth into kind of who they are and their experiences coming into this panel. So Nigel, if I can hand over to you, please.
Great, thanks, Christian. Good morning, everybody. So Nigel Lang, I'm the Chief Information Officer for Field Fisher. I've been at Field Fisher for just under 3 years, but I've been in the legal profession for over 20. My original background was within financial services. I think I've probably done pretty much every role within IT, but certainly the challenges which I face now are within the boardroom, and certainly cyber is very much at the top of that list. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Stephanie, good morning.
Good morning. So basically, I'm a cybersecurity expert and legal counsel specializing in privacy, data protection, and software as a service security operations with over a decade of experience advising global organizations in highly regulated industries. My focus is on combining legal expertise with technology to craft innovative compliance solutions for safeguarding digital ecosystems in the era of AI. I also have a company doing exactly that together with the former Chancellor of Austria, Christian Kern. And we're catering to small and medium businesses. And I'm glad to be on this panel today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Really appreciate you giving us some time and insight this morning. Graham, over to you. And if I may, ahead of or after your kind of introduction, would you, for the benefit of those on the call that maybe haven't heard about Arctic Wolf, give us a bit of a sort of headline overview of who you are and what you do, please?
Yep, sure. Thank you, Christian, and good morning, everybody. My name is Graham Holtz. As mentioned earlier, I'm the UK and Ireland Sales Director with Arctic Wolf. I've been with the company for just over 3.5 years. A little bit about Arctic Wolf for those who have not heard of us before. We're a global leader in security operations. We have over 7,000 customers globally. The sheer scale of our platform actually means that we see over 6 trillion events per week. So it's a significant platform across multiple data centers. We have we're good enough to be validated by IDC as a leader in what we do. But I think particularly relevant to this call today, although we operate across all verticals, we're incredibly focused on specifically the legal sector. There seems to be a natural kind of synergy between what we offer as a service and how we can help many firms globally. So we protect over 235 firms worldwide. That equates to over 80,000 practitioners that we're protecting 24/7. We also have a number of industry alliances with Mimecast and iManage and other relevant complementary technologies in the legal vertical. UK specifically, we have over 30 legal customers that we've acquired in the last 3.5 years. We're growing incredibly quickly in the UK and across Europe. But finally, just to add that ILTA send out a survey every year. It's a member survey to their 1,400 or so people who responded last year. Arctic Wolf were identified as the fastest growing, but also the most widely adopted security partner in the legal vertical. So I'm very excited about today's event. I think there's a lot to go through, and can't wait to get started.
Thanks, Graham, for sharing that. So as we get started then, I've got a series of questions I want to sort of direct to the panel. We'll take it all in turn as we've introduced ourselves, and we'll kind of go from there. So let's take a deeper look at the cybersecurity issues the sector's facing now, with increased reports on ransomware, business email compromise, invoicing fraud, and the like. These cyber issues plague our sector. But Nigel, if I can come to you first, how do you see specifically for Field Fisher the threat landscape has evolved this year?
Well, as I said, I think cyber certainly is number one or top of our agenda, and has been for, well, as many years as I can recall. The landscape this year, I think the biggest thing that scared me the most has been the rise of AI. Now, internally within legal, it's been fantastic. I think there's lots of opportunities for us to utilize UI, but unfortunately, in the world of cyber, I think AI has actually accelerated the capabilities. Last week, I was privy to a session that told me on average, a hacker takes about 40 hours to kind of prepare, an individual attack. That can be literally done within minutes now because of the use of AI and AI tooling. So without doubt, I think that's the thing that's been the real game changer in the last year.
Well, thanks for sharing that and getting AI in first.
I know, I thought I had to.
It's definitely had a big impact across the sector for a whole host of reasons, but thank you for sharing. Stephanie, come to you. How have you seen the threat landscape evolve this year?
So I think that the threat landscape has seen significant evolution over the past year, driven by the convergence of sophisticated AI-powered attacks and increasing reliance on third-party cloud services. And in the legal sector specifically, ransomware targeting law firms has escalated, with attackers exploiting privileged client data for double extortion. Additionally, the rise of supply chain attacks, as seen in the incidents like the MOVEit breach, underscores the critical need for robust third-party management strategies. And attackers now use a lot of generative AI. And I think that to counter this, law firms must shift from reactive measures to proactive cybersecurity frameworks using continuous monitoring, threat intelligence, and zero trust architectures.
Thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. That's great. Graham, over to you from a supplier perspective. What sort of threats are you seeing over this last calendar year? Was going to be one of us on mute.
Had to be me to start with.
Yeah, there we go.
So, yeah, thank you, Christian. So every year, Arctic Wolf release a threat report from Arctic Wolf Labs. And I think this year there's been a number of key takeaways. So to Stephanie's point, I think ransomware is top of mind still. In fact, we've seen a surge of about 20% in terms of the demands year on year, up to $600,000 on average. So that's gone up significantly. I think there's going to be some volatility. I think through the next 12 months as ransomware expand their list of targets. I think geopolitical issues, particularly around Russia, we've seen fairly well publicized over the weekend on the BBC website around expectation it will see more bad actor activity from Russia because of what's happening in the world. But we can't forget about business email compromise, to be fair. It's quite often thought about, second to ransomware, but business email compromise, it's typically easier to produce these kind of campaigns if you're a bad actor. So these are the things we're typically seeing. The other key area, I think, is phishing. Obviously, threat actors are still exploiting vulnerabilities, and in fact, we're seeing pretty much 60% of incidents exploited have been identified as a vulnerability back from 2022 or earlier. So I think from a general perspective, it's critical to get on top of vulnerabilities as quickly as you can to kind of close that door. But yeah, certainly we're not seeing things slow down. I think the threats are getting more varied. I think, as Nigel mentioned earlier, AI is becoming a critical point that I'm sure we'll talk about later through the webinar.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think looking back in across the sector, speaking to colleagues, it's more of the same, but the velocity and, dare I say, ferocity of those attacks have certainly gathered pace. Ransomware seems to be kind of that big black swan that kind of sort of people are, yes, indeed, worried about and trying to mitigate against, but the day-to-day grind is very much combating those email-borne threats because they pop up so quickly and they infiltrate the organization so easily. But yeah, it's good to hear. So taking that AI point that you left us with there, Graham, and I guess Nigel, to your earlier point, in a world where I guess the pace of change and the desire to remain relevant and innovative and forward-thinking as firms are, AI and data are really dictating the pace of how fast organizations can move. How do you sort of balance those business demands with the kind of resolve of solutions and controls to help support the organization? Nigel, you mentioned AI in your sort of opening gambit as well. So kind of
Sure.
How are you keeping pace with those rapid changes?
Sure. I think that's a really interesting question, actually, Christian. And I guess it's a challenge that absolutely every industry, even outside of legal as well as within legal, is facing. We're all obviously, certainly within the legal industry, paranoid about data leakage. The obvious thing to focus on would be that discussion, especially when we start talking about AI. So, I mean, for me, that was the number one thing. I didn't want our client or any of our data to find its way into LLMs because of the misuse of AI. That starts from both our own internal usage, but also ultimately down through our supply chain, because every single legal supplier needs to have that same level of knowledge that they can't just use, for example, publicly facing ChatGPT and just interface in with that, because anything they put into it is going to ultimately end up learning and becoming part of the LLM, the large language model. So that's kind of where we started. In regards to the AI, I've been going on I suppose for the last sort of 4 months, a long campaign of education within the firm. We've also been securing our own internal AI to make sure that that's compliant and putting in the relevant checks and balances. So fortunately, there is a good framework to work within if you use NIST. That obviously provides you with an AI framework. And we've been using that as a kind of governing control. So before we accept anything within the firm, we use that as our basic premise. As I say, we then do the sort of the checks and balances, and only if it then passes will any kind of third party or internal AI be allowed into the organization. It is a concern. It's something that I think we just got to remain on top of. It's a very, very rapid and fast changing market. So again, it's just sort of trying to keep everybody current. And as I say, the beginning to all of that story is education, teaching your users what's safe and what's not, what good AI looks like and what bad AI looks like. And I think that, it's as simple as that. It's try and get those basics right from the beginning and just instill good practice into people.
And with the use of AI technologies, does that influence your decision as to build it on premise or use cloud-based services, or does that not matter anymore for you?
I mean, I think it's fair to say as an organization, we're pretty cloud savvy and have been for a while. We've got a number of our core systems already in the cloud. We've moved and are continuing to move services into the cloud. So much of it is about the cloud. I think more of it is about actually understanding the actual AI itself and what controls you actually have in place. So we have chosen to stick with one, internally with one provider, because obviously it gave us that security and that agreement. But saying that, I'm currently onboarding a new supplier, and as we've gone through the due diligence checks around how they're handling their AI, they've just, by the way, brought AI into their product. It's revealed a lot of things, but actually, I'm glad to say this has been something that they've equally thought about right from the start. So although it's a new feature of their product, they've already started with the core tenets being in place, which is we put AI into the product, but the AI is safe, it's secure, and this is what we've done to ensure it. So, having those safeguards in place, and that being part of our due diligence process, when my clients come knocking on the door and ask us, because I'm absolutely positive they will do, and if they're not yet, they will do in the future, I can categorically say, yes, we've done this. This is what we know. This is how our suppliers are handling it. And so we've done that for everyone. This has also been an interesting one because, of course, the shadow IT world, that's always been the challenge I think most IT or internal IT departments have had. This has become a really useful tool to help me govern that as well, because if something doesn't conform and it has AI in it, it gives me the kill switch. There's no reason you should be using that because we have solutions that are certified, ratified, turn it off now. So that again has been very helpful.
No, that's good. That's good to hear, Nigel. Thanks for sharing that. Stephanie, to you, I guess with the world dictating the pace with AI and data, how are we sort of balancing our responses as security and privacy professionals?
So I agree with Nigel's statements regarding ChatGPT. And I also think that balancing cloud and on-premises decisions depends on a firm's specific regulatory, operational, and client requirements. And we have to find those as a privacy professional and as a IT security professional. In my experience, a hybrid model is often the best compromise because it's providing flexibility while maintaining control over sensitive data. Law firms usually have highly sensitive and regulated environments, such as handling litigation documents or client records. And for those, on-premises systems can ensure data sovereignty and minimize third-party risks. However, cloud-based software as a service solutions usually shine in scalability, collaboration, and AI integration, and they enable firms to deploy advanced analytics for case predictions and document review. Ultimately, I think that the decision must be informed by detailed risk assessment and compliance review. I think that firms should ask, does this platform comply with the UK GDPR, the DPA 2018, and in case of cross-border transactions, particularly with GDPR Article 28 for third-party processors, are we adequately addressing Schrems' two concerns about the data transfer? And I think that by combining those insights and providing sufficient safeguards, such as standard contractual clauses or binding corporate rules, law firms can protect the data and make sure that also data that will be sent overseas will be sufficiently secured.
No, it's a really great point, and I guess talks to the convergence of a risk, compliance, and legal kind of requirements coupled with the technology and the security requirements that we need to kind of bring that about. I think every firm I've spoken to have been talking about kind of not wanting to be left behind in this kind of AI super race. Nobody wants to be first, however, but everyone's quite happy with a second or third place about how it really is and has the potential to redefine our industry. But it also means that kind of the business is trying to kind of push boundaries ahead of necessarily having the control frameworks in place, whether they be NIST or otherwise. And actually, there's a big concern that there's a lot of shadow AI, akin to the shadow IT usage, where people are trying to innovate and evolve their practices and kind of operations, but using capability that maybe isn't fully sanctioned, or, as to your point, doesn't have the right kind of contractual clauses in play. Which I guess puts us on then to kind of how clients and vendors are responding with this sort of changing threat landscape. And Graham, coming to you, if I may, in terms of your position with Arctic Wolf, how are you looking to kind of evolve and respond to the market needs now, but also looking at the kind of the data you've had to try and predict and forecast where your business will be in 12 months' time?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of points. I mean, AI is a very interesting one. For us, it means many things. Obviously, if you think about the scale and size of our platform, I mentioned earlier, 6 trillion plus incidents every week. It's a huge volume of data. So AI, although there's a lot of talk about it in the market currently for all the right reasons, cybersecurity firms have been benefiting from AI and machine learning for many years. We need to leverage AI and machine learning just to get the sheer number of alerts and notifications that we see down to a reasonable level that we can triage against and produce actionable outcomes for our legal customers. Which is, by the way, it's one ticket per customer per day on average. So it's getting rid of all of the noise and making sure we get rid of the false positives. And clearly, AI and machine learning is key in that process. But we can't depend on that 100%. So we still need that human element. And I think that can't be forgotten. So every of the individual alerts that we typically see on a daily basis is validated by a human before it gets acted upon, and I think that's a critical piece. But I think the threat of AI generated breaches is definitely increasing, as that's been touched on already. And I think the targets is definitely kind of legal and professional services and financial organizations because of the nature of the data they hold. I think technologies such as generative AI are definitely promising time-saving advantages, but I think they need to be harnessed in the correct way around data control, and as Nigel's touched on already, and Stephanie. But I think the other trend we're seeing actually is deep fake. I think around video and Zoom call kind of deep fake kind of situations, and I think that's something we need to keep on top of. So for us, it's all about continual education, and we've got to make sure that we're educating the user community of the kind of up and coming threats and how to mitigate against those from a user perspective.
Yeah, no, 100%. Nigel, if I can come to you, I'm quite interested to hear about kind of how the clients are responding. The industry's unfortunately famed for receiving thousands of rows of Excel spreadsheets for client due diligence about kind of all things security and tech. But what do you think your clients are worried about at the moment, and how are they kind of playing that into the supply chain and I guess the expectations for your delivery?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's fair to say our audit requirements have not gone down in the last year. If anything, they're continuing on an upward trajectory. And you know, it depends obviously on each firm and each firm's client base. So you know, Field Fisher is predominantly tech and data, financial services, energy, and healthcare, life sciences. So 4 areas which you can imagine are all quite big targets, and certainly the areas which are all very much concerned about their supply chain. So we do get audited a lot, and you know, as part of that, one of the key requirements was basically, the SOC. How are we looking after our security? Obviously, the basic stuff is now considered table stakes. Your patching and everything else along those sort of lines. So, that I think is accepted that just should be done. That's a hygiene factor. They are now looking at kind of your internal controls. They are looking at the education of your staff, and they're also looking at how you are kind of constructed from everything from perspective to your cloud access control and everything else. So, everything I think is sort of up for grabs around areas of improvement for any firm. There's always going to be something, and I think for us certainly. We focused a lot, and something I focused a lot 3 years ago, of building a kind of really core competence around cyber. Having moved from a very financial services based firm to Field Fisher, it was something that I recognized was a real need for us to really hone in on. And as such, the use of external SaaS platforms is the better way of getting there for a lot of firms, and certainly for us it was. It was a way of us ensuring that we aligned ourselves to the controls. So I know Stephanie talked about obviously ISO and CIS and all the various other controls that are out there. So accreditation and moving ourselves to that. I mean, for a lot of firms, that starts with your basics, like your Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. But really, you need to be focusing higher, frankly, in my book. And then it's about building good practicing across the entire firm. So, as I said, it starts with the education piece, but trying to eliminate the shadow ITs. That it's always going to be there. I doubt we'll ever get away from it because of the need for servicing clients, and often it can be clients that are the ones that are asking a law firm to use certain types of software. So it's having that ability to be able to react quickly and to sort of say, yes, this piece of software is safe, or no, we've got major concerns about its supply chain. We've identified that actually it's for example, a Russian piece of software in origin. So, we stop using it instantly. So I think having the ability to pivot and have an IT team that's able to recognize those dangers quickly is also really important. And they're all kind of just basic skills. I mean, I think for a long time, cyber just didn't feature enough on, internal IT's radar. It was very much seen as a kind of a risk issue. It was a broader issue, I suppose, for the firm, but I think IT just saw it as we just need to make sure we're patching correctly. So for me, it was really driving that agenda and driving it really hard to bring internal IT's knowledge up, aligning ourselves with good, strong partners in this sector, but also, as I say, it's building the education across your entire user base, and that all just takes time, but it bears fruit ultimately.
Definitely. Thanks for that, Nigel. Stephanie, to you, looking at I guess the legal client space and the vendors that support the industry, how do you see them responding to the threat landscape we're facing?
So I think that they may be responding with using the advanced security controls that the providers usually provide, and I think that those may surpass those of in-house systems such as multi-layered DDoS protection and machine learning-driven threat detection. And I think that that basically going to the cloud also comes with a shared responsibility model. The provider secures the infrastructure, but the client is responsible for securing data usage, access controls, and configurations. And from a legal perspective, what you were just mentioning, I think that a challenge for law firms is to ensure that the provider security measures align with the firm's regulatory obligations. I think that essentially that's UK GDPR Article 5 that requires firms to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personal data. And I think that such an approach can be achieved with both on-premise and cloud models if they're properly managed.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I think we're certainly seeing clients waking up to or starting to really mature their expectation of security management in the supply chain when it comes to law firms, with greater details being shared within security schedules and sort of areas of just the kind of initial contract through to the right to audit and kind of the scope of what that audit does look like. And I also think firms are becoming a little bit braver to push back on some of those requirements, because I think historically have been quite onerous to date. But with resiliency legislation and sort of greater focus into supply chain risk more globally, certainly seeing a lot more focus from clients. And I think the challenge we all are struggling with is kind of the method of that, ranging from kind of third-party kind of assessment platforms to quite simple but rather large Excel spreadsheets, all sort of asking the same sorts of things, and kind of is their way of doing that level of due diligence. And I know we'll get on to third-party risk shortly, but I think it's very much the focus on the data in particular. To Nigel, your point, the expectation of having the basics in place, although more fundamentals, right? Because sometimes even the basics can be really hard, but sort of a lot of things around MFA, staff training, secure configuration, vulnerability and management. A lot of the stuff now is just expected. And actually, it's more an anomaly that if you don't have it, there's perhaps more questions to be asked. So as I mentioned there, around kind of that third party focus on the vendors, there's a bit of standardization coming through conversations in the sector about how organizations can do this better, or do this to meet the kind of appropriateness of their kind of risk appetite. But Stephanie, coming to you first, if I may, what sort of good things should firms be looking for to have in place to manage third party cyber risk?
So I think in the UK, managing third-party cyber risk starts with compliance with the UK GDPR's accountability principle. So this requires law firms to demonstrate that they have assessed and mitigated risk associated with their suppliers. And I could think about a couple of best practices, for example, contractual provisions, like including clauses ensuring third parties notify the firm of breaches within 72 hours, in line with UK GDPR Article 33, and also in line with the EU GDPR. And then I think in terms of due diligence, they should conduct supplier assessments, focusing on standards like Cyber Essentials Plus, recommended by the National Cybersecurity Center. And I also think that continuous monitoring and incident response plans are really important. For example, deploying real-time monitoring tools to track third-party security postures and ensuring ongoing compliance. And then I think it's also a little bit to implement the least privilege principle and implement segmentation and access control. So basically, this can be achieved by restricting third-party access to only what is necessary for their role. And with that, they can also implement the principle of data minimization.
Yeah, no, there's some really good stuff in there. Thank you for sharing. Nigel, over to you. What does good look like for you when managing third-party risk?
I mean, I guess I can only reiterate to some degree what Stephanie has said there, but I think the key thing is understanding your supply chain. Let's start with the basics here. Knowing who's in the supply chain, and that's not just, when I talk about that, the obvious one is everybody within IT goes, oh, I know who our suppliers are. That's great, but that's not the supply chain. The supply chain is everybody that your firm is dealing with, be whether it's from, counsel through to any experts, through to, well, whoever, basically, through to, your premises, you name it. So I think too often we kind of get into this exercise of thinking, okay, our suppliers are the likes of our DMS, our practice management. Yeah, they are. Absolutely. And they're the ones that are probably the best managed, I suspect. It's the ones that are, for example, the expert that happens to be the sole individual that has just a laptop, no IT help, has no idea, never had any training around cyber, that clicks on everything, that opens everything, send you, Word documents or whatever it may be, and uploads them to goodness knows whatever platforms. They are without a doubt part of your supply chain, but they're a part of your supply chain that most CIOs probably aren't aware of. And it's really understanding what the full supply chain looks like. So that's what I say. You start with understanding that supply chain, capturing the supply chain, and ultimately conforming to some kind of standards. So agreeing what that standard is and making sure that you have those regular audits. Stephanie talked about putting in clauses and terms. Wholeheartedly support that. The right to audit is got to be in your contracts, in my view. It's a kind of almost a default within ours, because as I say, at any point we are often requested to have that right of audit from our clients. I want to be able to do the same to my supply chain. It's as much an education process for them, because rather like a number of the firms have had this now for probably nigh on a decade, if not longer, and we've all got quite used to that kind of audit from the likes of the banks. And every year they will find something different. Every year we're asked to invest in X, Y, and Z new technology, but most of our suppliers probably aren't and never had it. This is all new. So it's about bringing them along on that process and for them to understand why this is so important. I would say it goes beyond just cyber, though, because, something that we're having to do as well as other businesses is obviously now look at our green footprint as well. And obviously all of that ethical piece, all of that kind of the green piece also needs to be reported. So it's about just educating your supply chain, working with them, partnering with them, as often is the case, is what we've had to do in a number of our smaller suppliers, because they just don't know where to start with a lot of this. It's all they see is cost. It's like, what's this going to cost me? How do I get myself certified for this? Where do I go? Who do I speak to? So these are all questions, dependent on the size and the complexity of your supplier, that you have to just help them with. So what we've done is we've built a number of FAQs, we've got a number of processes and ways in which we can help support them, and we're continuing to develop that as part of our supply chain management. So I'm not going to say we've got it nailed, but we're certainly making our way along that process, and continuing to try and improve it as we learn.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for sharing that, Nigel. Some really good takeaways in there. Graham, if I could, as our kind of token third party in the room, how do you find the industry's managing third party risk? Because I guess from your point of view, you're asking for kind of access to the crown jewels to deliver the service, right? So what are the good things the industry's doing? And maybe if you could share the things that maybe we could do better.
Sure. So I think third-party risk is a really interesting topic. So I think customers obviously lose faith in firms that can't protect their data. It's all about reputational damage, and it's top of mind, I think, at all levels within firms. I think just to echo Stephanie and Nigel, in fact, I think having a robust incident response plan is absolutely critical. And that really includes planning ahead with third-party organizations so that everybody's aware of their responsibilities and knows the response drill and lines of communication. So Arctic Wolf, we offer an incident response jumpstart retainer, which is an incredibly popular service. It's very cost effective, but it gives people basically the playbook for, it's a battle tested playbook, if you like, for incident run books. So I think that's really critical. Again, Stephanie mentioned monitoring and keeping on top 24/7. That's part of our core service with managed detection and response to make sure that firms are protected round the clock. So when you're having a Christmas holiday and it's a bank holiday and time off, that you're being protected, and third-party risks are also being monitored at the same time. So I think there's a few questions I think businesses need to ask regarding third-party risk. So what protections do we have in place today to detect unauthorized access, and is that 24/7? How do we qualify third-party vendors for contracts? So again, going back to the point of right to audit, I think that's pretty important as well as part of that contractual review. And how do we secure the supply chain? And again, I think MDR and providing partnering with organizations such as Arctic Wolf as a security operations partner can really help pick these kind of threats up very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing some really good stuff there. I remember when we set about building our supply chain risk team at Pinson's, one of the kind of big demands we found on the kind of incoming team was that just the volume of these requests, because everyone had a different contract start date or was operating on different time zones, and quite quickly the teams were being overrun with requests of what's your security like? And we found that the teams that were actually charged with running the security controls were being pulled away to tell people about what they should have been doing and not necessarily spending enough time to do the controls themselves. And what we found as a real winner for us is we started tracking time recording against the clients. And it quite quickly showed the level of work required to go into supplier assurance. So started with security, but then branched out into other disciplines, as you alluded to, the sort of sustainability or facilities, etc. And it's quite often a hidden cost when lawyers are kind of pricing work up and just assume that business support and business operations will be there to pick up the slack, or that they'll sign terms that sort of suggest 30 to 40 days of audit per year. And you just kind of think that's not really manageable. You need to kind of get a handle on that. So time recording for me was a really big thing, because it really just showed the volume and kind of the pinch points within the client list as to kind of who was a bit more demanding than others. But it allowed us to build that kind of response and resource it properly, because it was seen as a customer value add as well as a kind of risk mitigation. The other best practice. Sorry, go on,
sorry, Christian. I was just going to say, I mean, that to your point there, and I think the time recording is a fantastic idea. I have not done that. I've been tempted to, but on average, I would say most audits, or not even an audit, some audits can take 5 days plus. And certainly that's been my own personal experience. Depending on who the client is, obviously the depth of some of these come through, 50, 60, 70 pages. And as you say, often that's not appreciated necessarily by the relationship partner until you start to show the hard mechanics of, how much time has been spent doing this. And are we recouping enough for the investment we're making?
Yeah.
And also there's the hidden costs of that client, because as I say, almost every time, if an auditor is worth their salt, they should be finding something. And if they can't find something, they will make something. They will come up with whatever the next thing is you should be moving towards. And therefore, every time you end up getting audited, it's been my experience, you pretty much find you end up having to implement some form of new process control or technology. So there's always these hidden costs there. And I think trying to educate your partners to help them understand that this is the price of doing business, and please ensure there's enough margin in this deal to account for those hidden costs.
Exactly, and quite often before we tiered our supply chain and indeed our client base, the responses we were trying to give were just the same for everyone. But actually, a £10 million customer should certainly get a different response to a £1,000 customer. And we sort of created this tiering that allowed us to manage upwards in our supply chain to say, well, okay, clients meeting this criteria get this sort of service, clients meeting this, and so on and so forth. And that really allowed us to sort of tier our response, because at the lower end, it was just contracts. We'll define all of that and we're happy with that. But actually, others, for the sake of the relationship and future business, need a more personalized service. So I'm sure we could do a whole talk on supply chain risk before we get too distracted for our sort of main point. But thank you very much for sharing all of those bits of insight.
I would like to
as we
react
move
to
forward.
one
Sorry,
point.
Stephanie,
I
go
would
on.
like to react to one point.
Okay.
Because we were just talking about the time that an IT audit takes, and I fully agree with those statements. But I would like to add that misconfiguration is the top threat. Also in terms of statistics, so many breaches stem from improperly configured systems. So adding more people or adding more time won't help, because somebody has already configured that system. For example, using Azure or AWS or Google Cloud services, and they have spent the time. But they have done it incorrectly because they did not know how to do it. So it's also about finding the right people who have the skills required to configure the services, to integrate the services, and to train others how to use the services.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I guess you potentially will see that coming to this supply chain risk management piece immediately, if it's not there already, looking at, well, how are you configuring the services we are using, or indeed you're using to run your business, which I guess kind of perhaps leads us on into kind of, well, when we're implementing new services or indeed managing existing, say, cloud services in particular, how do we keep on top of managing those security controls, and what lessons or indeed good practices would you recommend? Stephanie, I mean, I'll come to you first if you don't mind. I guess in dealing with misconfiguration risks, how can law firms really kind of get on top of that?
They can get on top of it by finding the right specialists to configure the services for them. So, for example, a lot of customers and also law firms are using Azure or Microsoft services. So there's specialists that they have the right designation from a Microsoft company. So there are Azure security specialists, there's AWS security specialists, and firms can find those designated professionals and hire them to do the service for them, either whether they employ that person and do it in-house, or whether they use a specialized cloud provider, I think is not that important. What I also think is very important is to have appropriate integration, as I just mentioned. For instance, linking identity access management with cloud platforms ensures consistent enforcement of least privilege policies. And I think that's also very important that they have the right integration and the right training for their employees, and a lot implemented by design.
Yeah, no, that's some really good points. Nigel, to you, what sort of good practices or learnings that have you had on implementing those sort of controls around assurance for cloud-based services or the supply chain?
Sure. I mean, I think you do it hand in hand. So I agree with what Stephanie says. I mean, if you haven't got qualified staff configuring cloud services, then I don't think they should be configuring those services full stop. That's my starting premise, which is combination of the two. I think you need to skill team members. I think they need to be certified. They need to be qualified. Ultimately, you need somebody to be able to run that in an operational mode. But if it's something you've not done before, then absolutely work with a third party. Or if you have a management contract, make sure your third party has the relevant skills and certifications, as Stephanie was just saying. So I think that to me is a kind of the starting point for this. Beyond the skills of the certification piece, I think there's the need to also ensure two other things are in place. First being identity management is done correctly. So we talked about the access control and making sure all of those components are set up correctly. I think as part of that, your identity management piece is absolutely essential, making sure that you have that in place, you understand who's able to do what within those cloud services, and potentially working, if you have got a SaaS platform and you use them as a SOC, maybe linking up things like, has somebody done the relevant training? Have they got the relevant experience? Are they an individual that has shown to be a good citizen in the past? And they don't click on things, then okay, maybe they can have a higher level of access to be able to do this type of work. But if we know there are don't bother turning up for training, we know they click on everything, we probably want to limit the services that they'd be able to do. And certainly I wouldn't want them configuring an Azure tenant, for example. So some ideas around kind of using identity management to help kind of provision the amount of access that people can have and the types of things they can do. And then I think the last thing is putting in place some controls around kind of continual testing. So constantly challenging if you have got a third party SOC provider, SaaS SOC provider, challenge them. Make sure that you understand what happens in the case of a real scenario. How are they going to react? Are they going to identify it? If they do, what does that process look like? Do the same internally. Do lots and lots of tabletop sessions. So at all levels of your organization, ranging from your IT teams through to your BD marketing teams, about how they're going to cope in this type of situation if there was a penetration and an issue, or right up to your senior management. So again, dry running and dry testing all of this. So I think just practice, and make sure those controls are in place.
Yeah, thank you. Graham, over to you. I mean, I guess from you see when it goes wrong with clients, what are the things that people have missed that kind of they really should be doing to help mitigate some of these issues?
I think it's always a question that crops up when people are transitioning to more cloud services. If you think about legal in particular, I manage a lot of people moving from on-prem to cloud. There's a general general direction of travel, if you like, to cloud services. So I think one of the key things we do, and I think some of the value we deliver to many legal firms, is our concierge delivery approach to delivering our service. So essentially, two named security engineers become an extension of the organization's team, if you like. And one of the jobs they have is to take you through what we call security posture in-depth reviews. So it's taking a look at the cloud configuration and security controls in the cloud, and specifically looking at that area. And coming up with recommendations and guidance as a security operations partner to strengthen the protection for those applications as they move over to the cloud. So that's a key thing we've spent a lot of time on. They can be called upon ad hoc, but they typically help people strengthen their security posture when moving to the cloud. I think that's a key area we help firms with.
Yeah. No, that's good to hear. I think my experiences have been because both clients and firms have looked to try to adopt many different cloud-based services, both from a security point of view, operations, delivery, etc. You all of a sudden have this sprawl of SaaS applications that either have access into your data, into your network, and kind of being able to keep on top of those security configurations. To Stephanie's point around misconfigurations being kind of the sort of biggest pain point. And it doesn't help that kind of you don't read the change logs that come out from GCP and Azure in particular, where they say, oh, by the way, we've moved the menus. So when you go back into them to think, well, I need to go and check my posture here, it's no longer there, and it takes you 5-6 minutes to then work out where they've moved the options to, or they've renamed it to something else. So I think keeping on top of the kind of the administration and the kind of specification of the cloud services that are using, that it can be a real challenge. But also kind of being able to flow through the sort of standard security controls that you will have as a business through these different formats. Some play well with others don't. And then I think perhaps the kind of real world headline for me this year was the CrowdStrike outage, because a great example there of a good proactive kind of security control that I think for me shocked me twice, I guess. Once was the amount of customers that the CrowdStrike had globally, the people that are affected by it, but also the nature of that particular product had so much access, effectively kernel level access to the machines and servers that were operating in global businesses, that actually really starts to make you think that actually when security things go wrong, they inadvertently can do, that actually, well, should that have the right level of access, or should that access be there, or should it be mitigated? So it really presented an interesting kind of conversation on cloud-based security controls in particular, as to kind of how they operate and their level of investure into your organization. So thank you all for some really great comments and insights. We're moving into the kind of closing minutes now of our session, and just wanted to remind the attendees on the call, the chat's been a bit quiet, ladies and gentlemen. If there are any questions you've got for any of our panelists, please drop them into the chat, and we will look to get them answered. If we suddenly have a rush on before the end of the session, we'll commit to getting the responses back to you over email, along with the recording and other details. But in lieu of any panel questions coming through, I think I might just take advantage of being chair and maybe direct something towards you, Nigel. In one of your earlier responses, you talked about kind of business value, and actually your biggest challenge is now kind of the boardroom, so to speak, and not necessarily the operations. Not to say that your boardroom are risky users, but in terms of kind of articulating the need for value and investment for securing, I guess, support for your endeavors, however they kind of materialize. Firstly, how do you do that? What kind of sort of insights can you share? And like, how easy was that, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christian. I mean, I think everything that IT needs to do has got to show value. Start with that as the basic premise. So, it doesn't matter whatever service we run, we need to be able to show back some kind of value, be able to measure that value as well. Because if you can't do that, then, what is the point? How do you know you're doing the right things? So, cyber, I mean, I think it's fair to say maybe a decade ago was a challenge at boardroom level to get the investment. Every day you open I was about to say open a paper, show my age there. We don't open papers. We online we'll look at a story. I mean, the one that kind of jumped straight to mind for me right now was I think was it 25 million, that the Zoom scam, the deep fake. I mean, Graham mentioned deep fakes earlier. You literally have, you read about this stuff on a regular basis. And I think certainly, my managing partner, or it could be a CEO within an organization, they read these stories and go, gosh, and the first question they come and ask you as a CIO is, how are we protected? Could this impact us? Well, the reality is, in that type of situation, probably it's very hard to say yes. We would be protected because most of this is human error. But actually, was that person wrong in paying that money? No, because they were completely scammed. I don't know if anybody, you've seen it, Christian, but the deep fakes that you can create now with the likes of Zoom and the masking, you could generally think you're talking to your CFO. And
I'm actually a deep fake right this moment, Nigel.
Well,
nobody's noticed.
You could be an AI for all I know that I've been chatting to for an hour. It's very, very hard to distinguish. So, we are having to set up different types of control. We're having to try and encourage different ways of working. Not just that kind of trust of assuming what you see is the person you're working with, or what you hear is the individual you think it is at the end of the phone. So that paranoia, I think, without a doubt, helps the business case with the value, because we start with the basics. If this was to happen, how would we react? What would we do? We could be doing all of the basics really well. We could be doing everything really well, but as it says, it takes a hacker one hit, and we've got to protect against billions of possible scenarios. So, the odds are always stacked against us as the organization, unfortunately. And I think, at a boardroom level, that appreciation is really hit home recently, probably more so than ever. So, I think the difference is not necessarily obtaining the value or the monies to be able to secure, but it's actually going out and finding the right services for you as an organization. And that actually, I think, is the biggest challenge, because it's a very, very crowded marketplace. You have to look around. Everybody is at the moment pivoted to sell cyber. Products that I've seen that I've used in a decade ago have suddenly pivoted and become a cyber product. And you're like, really? I'm not.
There'll be AI by this time next year, I'm sure.
They probably will. There'll be AI with cyber.
Yeah.
But it is surprising how much the industry is suddenly now in the focus, because the industry realizes that's where the money's at. So the biggest challenge is, as a CIO, is choosing the right products and the right alignment. And I think that a lot of that comes down to knowing what your issues are, knowing what you want to fix, and most importantly, as an organization, defining your processes and your procedures really well, because you should get to the point that your partner should be able to marry those up, and you should have the confidence in your SaaS SOC provider to be able to run those processes for you in the absence, because it could be Christmas Day, it could be a time when you've got
Yeah,
minimum
no,
staff around.
I think that's absolutely spot on, Nigel. I'm going to have to stop you there because I'd love to hear from Stephanie before we close, and we could quite happily do this. Maybe Francis can organise a 8-hour webinar for us next time, and we can just fill the time. Stephanie, one of the questions I had for you, based on some of your earlier comments, I guess it was looking at talent and kind of sort of approved individuals and what have you to deal with this challenge. Do you think law firms are equipped internally to deal with these sort of cyber threats? And if not, where should they go?
So I think that there's two strings to that answer. The first part is, I mean, law firms currently have like usually a lot of job offers on their platforms, and if they're able to select people for those job openings, then they're probably also going to be able to select people for other job openings in cyber. And I think that they can get help from outsourced organizations in the selection process. That includes both hires and external companies. So if you do not have the expertise, maybe it's better to get that expertise before you take a decision. And then I think the second string of the answer is that I've seen clients being increasingly demanding in terms of transparency and accountability from vendors, particularly in light of regulations like the EU Digital Operations Resilience Act. So it's no longer enough for vendors to just promise something. Firms now want evidence of compliance, such as audit reports and certifications, and they're increasingly insisting on contractual penalties for breaches or non-compliance because they have learned they're being sold like something big, but then the service fails to deliver, and the other companies may be having people that are sick, that are not arriving, that may not have the certifications to actually do the configuration, or they may only have one or two specialists, which may not be enough to really ensure the provision of the service if they have like a lot of clients. And vendors, on the other hand, are responding to those issues by investing heavily in automation and AI-driven security tools. So, for example, many SaaS providers now offer real-time anomaly detection on their systems to mitigate insider threats. And overall challenges remain, especially in aligning these efforts with jurisdictional requirements for data localization and cross-border transfers.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for sharing that. So as we come to a close, I want to thank all the attendees firstly for letting our panelists off extremely lightly by not asking any difficult questions. If you do have any follow-ups, I'm sure Nigel, Stephanie, Graham, myself will quite happily take those. You can, I'm sure, find us all online. We've looked at a lot of things this last 60 minutes, and I think we've only really scratched the surface, but I really appreciate my fellow panelists joining and kind of giving some time, and more importantly, some insight that we've been able to share with the community. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you all at the next one.